Halloween, the end of October, is the most enchanted or haunted night of the medieval calendar. It's a time when the veil between the living and the dead is the thinnest, and people light fires and candles to try to drive away the evil spirits. The origins of Halloween are about as mysterious as the event itself. It was incredibly popular in medieval times and was co-opted by the Christian Church and is still going on. The origins go back into prehistory, probably. Some people say that one of the Roman festivals was co-opted into Halloween. Others talk about Celtic festivals, or even things moving from the harvest into Halloween. So even today, Halloween brings with it its own mysteries. One of the interesting things about the medieval period is, of course, they were very aware of ancient burial mounds, and of course the ancient burial mounds became fairy mounds, and the rumour that there were treasures inside them is of course partly true. As we know from archaeological digs, there is actually treasure in burial mounds. So at Halloween, a lot of these things were thought to stalk the land, so the evil spirits and the fairies would come out of these mounds and would stalk the landscape. And what people did is light huge bonfires to drive the evil things away. And in some cases, church bells, which were specially maintained for the event. Church bells were rung throughout the night to drive away evil spirits. Problem with that is that it kept lots of people awake, and we know that it's likely Henry VIII banned that kind of thing. So Tudor times, everything changed. But in medieval times, people were very aware of the mysteries of the past, and so fire and flame and bells became an important component of the Halloween celebration. It's also a time for stock taking and assessing what you've got from the harvest, so it all mixes into the harvest festival as well, but it's afterwards. Some talk about it being the beginning of winter, or the death, as it were, of plant life and the earth. But I don't think of it that way, and I think many people wouldn't have thought of it that way. I think it is nature is going to sleep. I think it is a transitional period, and as such, it means change is coming. Death is coming, but it's not yet here. One of the perhaps more forgotten aspects of the Halloween period is what's called Punky Night. Punky Night is all about lanterns, punky being an old word, slang word for lanterns. Now, of course, until the discovery of the Americas, we don't have any kind of pumpkins in Europe whatsoever. So the jack-o'-lantern, the grotesque face, would have been carved into turnips or swedes, or whatever kind of root vegetable was available at the time. They would all be hollowed out and have faces carved in them, and they'd be placed around around everywhere, basically, to try to defend the place against the evil forces, and also because it's quite good fun. In the medieval period, of course, light in the darkness was quite an expensive thing to do. Candles cost a lot, rushlights were cheaper, but if you could avoid it, you would basically do your work in the day and you would sleep at night when there wasn't any light to do things by. So to actually light up the darkness was really pushing the boat out for a lot of medieval people. Sometimes the lanterns would be put on fence posts and gate posts with an effect that they're supposed to repel evil spirits and keep them away. Who knows whether they did, but they certainly would have made an interesting visual spectacle on Punky Night. As a link to the more pagan aspect of Halloween perhaps, you might want to get your animals inside during the Halloween period, and if you want to be doubly sure, you would protect them with boughs of rowan. The orangey red fruit of the rowan tree were particularly toxic to evil things. You can eat them as a human being, but they're particularly repulsive apparently to witches, warlocks, goblins, devils and all sorts of things. And even some travellers who had to travel during Halloween made small crosses of twigs of rowan. So it's fascinating to think that some of the earlier pagan practices were kind of shining through quite strongly even in later medieval periods. After the Halloween festival itself, you of course had what's called All Saints' Day. Now, All Saints' Day almost certainly came in with Christianity, and it was sort of an adjunct to Halloween, I guess perhaps in an attempt to make it a little bit more holy and sort of sensibly religious. All Saints' Day is when everybody got together and prayed for the souls of the saints. Once you have prayed for the souls of all the saints, the next day you get the opportunity to pray for the souls of ordinary people. So All Souls' Day is a time when the newly departed and those that might be stuck in purgatory are prayed for. And basically it's an opportunity to spread the prayers away from just the saints to ordinary people. On All Souls' Day, one of the other traditions was that the poor of the town or village would go begging for soul cakes. And there were various rhymes associated with this as well, and I'm sure they varied from place to place and from time to time. Souling, for soul cakes we go. 1 for Peter, 2 for Paul, 3 for him who made us all. If you haven't got a cake, an apple will do. If you haven't got an apple, give a pear or 2. If you haven't got a pear, then God bless you. Now that last bit, maybe that last bit's actually slightly threatening, because it's almost implying that something bad is going to happen to you afterwards. Maybe I'm misreading the poem, but it does appear that way. If you haven't got a pear, then God bless you. But this maybe is where the idea of trick-or-treating comes from. So the poor would go around and would ask for soul cakes, a particular type of small bun, we think. Nobody's quite sure how they were made, and I'm sure they had tons of regional variations. And basically it was a little gift to give the poor, maybe a bit of fruit, maybe sort of bread, maybe sweetened, maybe a bit like a modern day brioche. I don't really know, and I don't think anybody does know. Of course, one of the reasons why Halloween may be seen as a time of year when spirits can come down to earth is the fog. The fog is ever present at this time of year, especially in England, especially in river valleys. And of course people lived near water, and fog rising from the ground at this time of year probably reminded people of their departed loved ones. And so Halloween and all the ceremonies around it became part of the folk festivals. Don't forget that Halloween is a sequence of events. You have Punky Night, you have Halloween itself, and then you have All Saints' Day, which is a Christian co-option. And finally you have All Souls' Day, which is when you pray for the souls of everybody, not just the saints. It's a time for reflection and I suppose sadness, in that harvest is in, which is good, but the winter is coming and everybody knows that the winter is much harder. and there might even be famines if the spring doesn't come at the right time. But basically, it's the beginning of the turn of the year towards winter. Good boy, hey? You don't care though, do you, hey? You just want some grass. Good boy. So Halloween could be seen by some as a sad time of year. It's a time for reflection. The excitement of the harvest is over, and everybody is starting to think about the winter and all the hardships that the winter will bring. Because in an agrarian and medieval environment, winter is undoubtedly much harder. Today, we're a little bit, I suppose, isolated from the seasons. We live in air-conditioned or heated environments. Now, of course, people had a fire and they often had roofs over their heads, but at the same time, you go outside and it can be freezing cold or muddy. And therefore, the winter was a time when everybody knew everything would take longer and would be harder to do. Horses grow long coats as well in preparation, so everything is changing. Interestingly enough, perhaps for some of you, horses try to put on a lot of fat at this time of year. They work hard at eating, they get hungrier, and they eat as much as they can because they're trying to put on fat in preparation for the winter. And so do a lot of wild animals as well. I had a notion as well about why Halloween might be celebrated at this time of year, because the landscape is completely covered with cobwebs. And these cobwebs are from young spiders, we know this today, but you could imagine a time when people weren't quite so familiar with where the cobwebs came from. And so you could imagine that they were spooky remains from the spirit world which had settled onto the landscape. You can see behind me the early webs of millions upon millions of young spiders. And so it makes for a particularly unusual landscape. But also, if you're getting up very early in the morning, you will see them. It's a beautiful time of year, but it must have been quite spooky. And even today, if you think about it, cobwebs are an important component of all the kitsch stuff you can buy in the shops that are to do with Halloween.